Hello and welcome to Geography Rocks. Today we're looking at the third lesson in resource management, which is all about global food production. As you can see from the map, global food consumption is not equal around the world. Canada, the United States and Europe consume most of the calories. In sub-Saharan Africa, the daily calorie intake is lower than the 2,000 to 2,400 calories which is recommended per day. So why is this? Well, in some of these countries there's growing populations, which means that there's less resources to go around. Development and the amount of wealth that a person and a country has means that some people can afford more. In countries such as the USA and parts of Europe, that leads to obesity though, so it's not always a positive thing to have more calories. Transportation means that food is available in different countries at different times of the year. So improved transport, improved rail, road, air, freight, etc. means that food can be transported quickly from one place to another so that richer countries never run out of food. So let's take a look at the pattern of food supply and why it is the way it is. So the first thing to note is that the global pattern of food supply is unequal. The USA, Brazil and UK have high outputs. This is because of intensive farming and investment. So they are producing huge quantities of food. China and India have large populations and high agricultural outputs, so again produce a lot of food. Sub-Saharan African countries produce less food. The rainfall is not reliable and there's less money to invest in the production, and there's a lack of expertise in the farming industry. Let's take a look at this. This is about food security and what we understand about that term. So food security is about having access to affordable, nutritious food. This is essential to a healthy life. Remember, if you eat well, then your health is going to be better, you're going to be able to be more productive during the day, your workforce will be better. So it's not just about having food, it's the impact that having good food has on a person, a community and a nation. The word surplus is when there's more food in a country or in an area than that population needs. Countries which do not have enough food and have to rely on imports have a food deficit, and many of these countries also experience food insecurity. Pause the video here and just try to jot down a few factors which you think could affect food security. They might be physical or human factors, but things which you think will have an impact on the amount of food a country can produce. So let's take a look at some of the ones that I came up with. So climate is a factor that will affect food security. If a climate is too hot, too dry, or too wet, or too cold, then produce will be limited. Climate change is a physical factor, and as climates change around the world, farmers are having to adapt and diversify to make sure the crops that they grow to the best of their ability in that particular climate. Down in the bottom you can see a little insect. Climate change means that sometimes pests can thrive, and that's going to have an impact on the amount of crops that you produce. You will hear sometimes during this film the word yield, Y-I-E-L-D, yield, and it's about how much of a crop is produced. So the pests will affect the amount of yield that a farmer can produce. Irrigation is to do with watering the crops, and you can see a photo of farm irrigation just to the left there, and it links to technology. Richer countries can invest in irrigation and in farming technology and therefore produce higher yields of crops. Another human factor which can have an impact is war and conflict. If a country is going through a process of war or conflict with another nation, or even within the country and civil war, etc., then money is being spent on that war, and men are often fighting, and therefore you've got less money and less people to invest in agriculture. And down on the bottom right, we've got the word poverty. If a country is poorer, an LIC, for example, a low-income country, then it has less money to invest in technology and technological advances. Let's take a look at the impacts of food insecurity. So over on the left, we've got a picture of a famine. Now this is Somalia, and it says underneath, famine is a widespread shortage of food which often causes malnutrition, starvation and death. And you can see a line of women waiting in line to get maize or wheat or whatever it is that they are waiting for. They're trying to get some food aid. Over on the right, there's a map which shows the location of Somalia, and as you can see, it is east of Ethiopia and east of Kenya in Africa. And it says beneath, in Somalia, in 2010 to 2012, the United Nations estimated that over 250,000 people died as a result of food insecurity. This area in Somalia has physical and human factors at play. Physical factors are that it experiences low rainfall and poor harvests, and some of the livestock have died along the way. In parts of Somalia, there's a militant group blocking aid from moving from one part to another, so not only do the crops not necessarily grow and the livestock don't thrive, but equally there's militant action which stops aid, such as Oxfam and CAFOD, from moving rice supplies, etc. from one place to another. You may wish to pause the tape here and take a few notes on Somalia. Where is it? What's going on? And what are the causes of food insecurity in that area? In addition, we've got two more factors to take a look at on this slide. So the first one is rising prices, and it says between 2007 and 2008, the price of rice went up, which meant that the poorest people could afford half the rice they could the previous year. Now, even within your own families, you will notice that when the price of bread goes up, there may be a conversation about that at home, because it's the price of wheat that has risen, and therefore the price of the bread has also gone up. But in richer countries, if bread goes up 3 or 4 pence a loaf, although you notice it, it's not a big factor. But in poorer countries, in LICs, where they really do rely on foods such as rice, maize, wheat, etc., then if the price goes up, it has a large impact because they've got less available money to play with. Soil erosion is another factor. If an area is overgrazed or they're growing too many crops in one area, then land on the edge of desertification may become deserted, and that's a problem. Deforestation as well leads to a reduction in land productivity, because when you remove the trees from an area, the soil will often be eroded either by rain or by wind, because the roots of the trees are no longer there to bind the soil together. We've looked at similar things when we've been looking at the magic stones in Burkina Faso, so hopefully we're starting to make some links between our units. So here's a 6-mark question which says, explain how both physical and human factors affect the world supply of food. So we've been asked to do a couple of things here. We've been asked to explain, which means that we will need to use the phrase which means that, and we've also been asked to consider physical and human factors. So I've drawn a little table so we can start to think about those human and physical factors. If you're unsure, draw this table and then go back a couple of slides and look at the pictures where we talked about climate, etc., and see if you can remember any human or physical factors that affect the world supply of food. Pause the tape here and draw that table and see what thoughts you can come up with. So here are some of the ideas I had for human: war and conflict, the development of technology, irrigation, the price of rice or maize, and general development of a country, how rich it is and what level of poverty it might be standing at. Physical factors, we've got climate change, and pests which are thriving as a result of a certain type of climate. Pause the video in a moment and try to write your answer. You remember, you're trying to explain, so you're trying to use that phrase which means that or as a result. You're trying to talk about physical and human factors, so split them. Choose to write about human first or physical first, and then vice versa. If you can mention a place such as Somalia and talk about a specific thing that's happened there, then that's going to be a good thing too. Pause the video now and have a go at writing your 6-marker. Okay, I hope that went well for you. So let's take a little look. This is a response that I wrote, and I tried to write it in a short amount of time as though I was in an exam as well, to give you an idea of the amount I would be able to write. and the language I would use. So I've started off by looking at physical factors. You will see in the text I have used red where I'm using key geographical terms. I have used purple where I'm mentioning a place name, and the green is where I've tried to develop my English strategies in order to answer the question as well as I can. So this is what I wrote. There are many factors which affect the world's supply of food. Physical factors include things such as the climate of the area. This is a factor in Somalia, whereby the droughts experienced affected the yield of basic crops. In addition, climate change means that some areas are having to diversify and change what they grow. This will benefit some areas and cause problems for other places. In addition, climate change can increase pests and insects, which can damage or deplete crops. So that's the physical section. Hopefully that matches what you've got written down. If not, pause the tape now and take a look at what you wrote and try to improve it, green pen it. Looking at what I've written, pause now and then see what your human section's like. If it looks a bit like that, then you're on the right track. If not, spend a moment seeing if you can think now how to improve what you've written. Okay, welcome back. So this is my human factors section, and it says, human factors play a part. In HICs, high-income countries, with more wealth, more money can be spent on technology, and therefore improved yield come from improvements to farming through farm technology such as irrigation. HICs can also afford the fertilisers and pesticides used to increase yields. The price of crops also affects the supply of food. LICs cannot afford as much of their staple foods, rices and maize, when the prices go up. Furthermore, social unrest and conflict, such as that in parts of Somalia, mean that food production is harder, and both money and people are being used in conflicts, which could be spent on agricultural development. If you need to, pause for a final time on this slide and either copy out the response that I wrote or make and amend your own. So let's have a think about how food supply can be increased. There is some information about this on the playlist section of my YouTube, and there's also good sections on this in the AQA Caboodle book, so you can either find that on Caboodle or you may have the revision guide already. Otherwise, you may wish just to look on YouTube for these things and see what you can find out. So, how can food supply be increased? Irrigation, which is the artificial watering of the land, is a really important way of boosting the yields and the amount of food you supply. You can effectively, if you've got enough money and expertise, turn a desert into a farm. So this is done by building dams and reservoirs. It can benefit large commercial farms. There are some smaller schemes in part of Kenya which involves pipelines and drip irrigation to support domestic food cultivation. Drip irrigation is a simple pipe with little holes in, and it just allows water to drip out steadily and feed the plants and crops directly. So rather than watering it with a watering can, it's like getting the water as near to the roots as you can, so you're being as efficient as you can with your water supply. Biotechnology includes the development of genetically modified crops to produce a higher yield. Again, thinking back to your biology work, you've looked at this in, I think it's B7, where you've looked at genetically modified crops, and you might have watched that Animal Farm documentary in your biology lessons that links to this. In the United Kingdom, there's been some opposition to this due to the perceived effects on the environment and on human health. Over on the right, there's the phrase aeroponics and hydroponics, and there's a photo to show what that looks like. So aeroponics is where plants are sprayed with fine mist containing plant nutrients, and hydroponics is where we use artificial light in the winter and the plants are grown at waist height, so it's easier to harvest, and they use mineral wool as a growth medium, so you can see that going on there. So it doesn't look like a traditional farm, but they're using science to make the farm as efficient as they can. Down the bottom it talks about the Green Revolution. Again, I've added a film about this onto the playlist section in the resource management playlist, and it says the Green Revolution focuses on sustainability and community, water harvesting and irrigation, soil conservation, and improving seed and livestock quality. It's about education, sharing expertise, using technology, and improving the yields of an area. Particularly worked in India, whereby it saw the increase of yields from something like 11 to 50% or something. So have a little look at the video that goes with this section on the playlist. Okay, so here we're being asked to do some math skills. It says in the table shows data for the increase in the total global area of GM crops, millions of hectares, between 1996 and 2009. We've been asked to use the data to draw a line graph. And what trends does the graph show? So our first task here is to draw a graph. If you feel confident with that, you can pause the tape now and you can just draw the graph. If you feel that you might need a little bit of support with that, then just play the film on for a short moment and you will see the axes that have been drawn to support you with that graph drawing. Good luck. Okay, so if you needed a little bit more support with drawing this graph, we always try to put time along the x-axis. So that's the one that goes across. And you can remember that because an x is across. So we can remember that time goes across on the x-axis. So I've split it and put my years along the bottom there. And then I've put GM crop, millions of hectares, up the sides. Now I decided to go up in 20s. Because it fitted nicely on that piece of paper that I had. I didn't have graph paper at the time, so I had to make do with squared paper for this one. So hopefully this will be enough to get you started, so you could try to plot your graph. Again, if you're unsure, continue to play on and you'll see my graph, but if not, stop and have a go at doing the graph. Okay, so hopefully your graph will look something like this, and then we're being asked to consider the trends that graph shows. Whenever we're asked about the word trend, if you see the word trend, what does a graph show? The examiner's looking for you to use the phrases increase, decrease, steadily, rapidly. You need to use data. I've written that in capital letters there, and that's not just the years, but that's also reading off the GM crops in millions of hectares off the left-hand side, off the y-axis. You can use the word fluctuates if it's applicable. It would not be applicable with this graph because the graph doesn't fluctuate. So just looking at the graph, you can hopefully identify that the words you're going to use are increase, and I would say steadily, increase steadily over that period of time. Let's take a look. This would be a 3 marker, and I've written from the graph, I can see that since 2000, when there were 44 million hectares of GM crops, the rate has steadily increased to 2014 when it reached just over 180 million hectares. On my graph, you'll see I've done a couple of things. So first of all, I've used the ruler to rule off across to my axes so that I get a really clear reading so that the data I use is correct. My marks are coming from talking about 44 million, 180 million, and the phrase steadily increase. That's where those marks are coming. So it's a short response, but every mark is there. My name's Mrs. Wingham, and you've been listening to Geography Rocks.